I understand that suffering can come from not wanting change, but what about wanting change? That can bring suffering too.
Wanting change to be a particular way is certain to be disastrous. Everything comes to he or she who waits, provided they're not waiting for anything in particular. It would seem as though what we want is to be fully alive, to be responsive, to be balanced, to be harmonized, to be more open, to be more clear. And if we consider that that is a desirable direction, then it's useful to relax the idea that everything we believe is true. And there is that tendency to think that whatever we're thinking is true, and to believe whatever we're thinking is true, and to also believe that it really is how we see it. And it's really that because that's what we know and that's what we see. So we define reality and truth as our perception. And we define ourself as how we see ourselves. It begins with an idea that we have a self. We have an idea that we have a self that is a particular way. Now, the notion of our self is taught. It's a part of our language. It's part of our culture, and that we have a separate identity, and then the qualities of this identity, how we think of ourselves is taught. Early on, the small child interprets the facial expression, tones of the caregiving parent. So if father is angry, the child being a tiny bit more egocentric than we are now, interprets that to mean I must be bad. Daddy's angry. Or if mother is sad and tearful, the small child may think I'm not good enough to make mother happy. There must be something wrong with me. What we'd like to do is to outgrow that tendency to construe what's going on to always mean something about me. Nobody thinks more about you than you do. We're alive and well in the theaters of our minds. In fact, the most frequent thought that people have about you is they're wondering what you're thinking about them. So as we can relax that tendency, we can be less self-conscious, more spontaneous, more alive, more open, more expressive, and more free. We can increase our degrees of freedom and our expressive nature. So one of the ways to begin to deconstruct the frozen, fixed idea of self as a thing that is separate from other things, is to play with this idea about us not coming from or being birthed by the past, but being birthed by an ever-arriving future, so that we are not something that has already happened, and that we can begin to experience the possibility of being plugged into a dynamic, ever-arriving energy that is always present, that is birthing ourself and all appearances. This is a more enlivened way of being in the world, because we're not pre-recorded, and we don't constantly assume that we already know this or that, or that we already know the people that we're interacting with to be a certain way. Our experiences are highly interactive, so that if you know your close friend or your partner to be a certain way, and we interact with the memory that we have of that person, we freeze our perception of the other. The dynamic aliveness of the other becomes frozen and fixed. And the self that we then represent gets frozen. And long-term relationships can become quite dull, boring, predictable, deadened. And we wonder what happened to the aliveness of our relationship. And the aliveness of our relationship is deadened by how we're relating. In fact, we might stop thinking about relationship as though it's a noun, and be thinking about relating. Relating as a verb. And we might consider the interactive nature between how we know and what is known. What we know is a consequence of how we know it. I think that's enough food for thought.